In that case, I'm going to start over. But thank you, and for so much for joining us, Andrew Joseph White. We're really excited to have you. I've been trying to get something with you for a while now. I'm a big fan. Absolutely loved your first book. It blew my mind, and I was so thrilled to read the second one as well. And yeah, we are just absolutely ecstatic. So thank you and welcome.
I'm glad to be here. I'm glad it worked out.
For sure, yeah. But I have a little outline here for us. Pull that up. Yeah. But yeah, welcome so much. Andrew Joseph White is here from Virginia. He received his MFA in creative writing from George Mason University in 2022. And from his bio online, he writes about trans folks with claws and fangs and what happens when they bite back. But yeah, I wanted to talk today both about both of your books a little bit. I also wanted to talk about just like the resurgence of horror in general that we've been seeing. Our section here at our store has absolutely exploded. We've had problems keeping things on the shelf. It's really cool to see a genre take off, especially in relationship to like the LGBT community and own voices and all of that. So I think it's very cool, very exciting to see those things in the wild. But yeah, my first point here, I was going to talk about like own voices and trans narratives and how amazing it has been for me to see that for the first time in my life. Like I've never really seen works like this just in public on the shelf, like available like this. And it's been really amazing for me to see it. So, yeah, thank you for writing these works.
Well, I'm just glad that I get to do this. Because I remember I figured out that I wasn't cis around like 2018. I was still trying to figure out what that meant or what exactly was going on. But yeah, so it would have been 2018. I had like been like 19 or 20. I was still, I was in college at the time. And I remember trying to find books with a trans main character. And you just couldn't do it, especially because I was looking for trans boys. And on top of that, good luck finding a gay trans boy in 2018. Oh, good God, you just couldn't do it. The first book that I managed to get a hold of that was anything like that was Cemetery Boys by Aiden Thomas. And
So,
that was a solid year or so after I had finally come out that I managed to get my hands on it. And now Aiden Thomas and I are represented by the same literary agent, which is wild to me. Um, but yeah, I just remember being, like late teens, early 20s, having nothing. And then I can now go down to, we have 1,000 books, over 1,000 books in our house. My wife is a bookseller.
mm,
So I can go downstairs right now and find like at least 10 books with main characters that are trans guys, which was absolutely unimaginable. And we only have like a fraction of what's because we can't buy every single book. And it's amazing. You can actually find things on the shelves now. It blows my mind. It was not like that when like 5 years ago, maybe.
for sure. Yeah, I completely agree. Even shorter time period. Like I've been working here at the Book Loft for about 4 years, and it's only been in the past couple too that I've really seen like the resurgence and more of them coming out. Especially like I said with the horror genre, both in YA and in an adult too for LGBT. One that comes to mind that's really stuck with me and a lot of people is Gretchen Falcon Martin's Manhunt. It's been really top of the shelves for a while there. And A lot of the folks that purchased that and are big fans of that as well have also loved Hell Followed with Us for the same reason.
Yes.
It's trans horror. It incorporates that narrative in a new and unique way, and it's fascinating. So
I mean, there's a lot to pull from. Be-
that's true. That's true.
like being trans is if you think about it too hard, the body horror is right there. It's
Oh, for
right
sure.
there.
Oh my God, yeah. But is here. But yeah, with the parallels between those storylines and like just trans itself and making it more something that any reader can understand. Like it's not just for LGBT youth and trans youth to read these stories and to see themselves in it, but through like the lens of fiction, I feel like it's a really cool way to explain things and to show things. And despite it being horror, showing that it's not scary and it is a normal part of the world. Um, but I wanted to ask also about like outside of like trans narratives and things like that, the horror elements by themselves in your stories are so very unique. But and I was just wondering, like, where do you draw from that? Where do you find this inspiration for this virus, this in Hell Followed with Us, for example, showing like this body horror that's almost like the fly, or not the fly, but the thing mixed with like a pandemic. That was such a cool idea to me. And then also with the spirit bears its teeth and like the ghosts and just spiritualism to a massive scale involved in the political sphere was like blew my mind. I had never thought about that combination. That's just so cool. So
I mean, there are a lot of terrifying things in the world, and it compounds being a marginalized person. Specifically, though, when it comes to Hell Followed with Us, so the flood virus in this. So I've always had like a really deep connection to body horror. The way that I talk about it was, when I was a little kid, I was disconnected from myself due to gender dysphoria I did not understand and had no words for. And then I was also disconnected from other people because nobody knew I was autistic, and we wouldn't figure that out until my early 20s. So when you can't connect with other people and you can't connect with yourself, you're not really left with a whole lot. And the only place I really ever saw that represented was in monsters. And this started really, really young. So like when you're like in kindergarten, your idea of a monster is, I don't know, like the heffalump from like Winnie the Pooh, or like a big scary dog or something. But as I got older, I started like discovering horror and getting like really connected to the more grotesque monsters there. I watched a playthrough of Dead Space when I was 12 because my parents wouldn't let me get it. I had to watch someone else play it. And some wires got crossed. When I
mm,
saw the necromorphs for the first time, I was like, oh, this is going to become a defining moment of who I am as a human being. I am overly connected to these rotting monsters that are reanimated corpses brought back by a virus. And I went, so I'm gonna write a whole book about it. And I'm gonna make the monsters, like the gross, like corpse guys, our friends. How what other because I wanted to be one so bad. So I was like, you know what? I'll just live vicariously through my main character who becomes a terrifying monster by the end of the book. And it just so happened that that was a very apt metaphor for dysphoria and the way that trans people are seen by outsiders and reclaiming your status as something disgusting or unwanted and coming to love it anyway. It just worked out. With The Spirit Bears Its Teeth, a lot of it came from the way specifically, and it's starting to become more and more common, and I don't like that, is the way that disability is used to invalidate young trans people's understandings of themselves. It's become a terrifying running theme of being like, oh, you're autistic. You don't know what you're talking about. You can't know yourself. You have a developmental disability. We're going to like paternalistically tell you that you don't know yourself, or are not smart enough to know what you really need, which is ugh. So much of The Spirit Bears Its Teeth is like based on that intersection of where ableism and transphobia often hits misogyny of different types in this, because so much of this is, oh, you're a silly little disabled girl, you can't know yourself. So that on top of it is also like horrifying to live in that intersection, and I'm not a fan of it, to be quite honest. And so much of that was how that plays into institutions, especially institutions that are obsessed with death and bloodlines, which is not a good combination. So much of my horror is like based in like, oh, things IRL suck all the time, always, actually.
very true, very true. Um, Yeah, I thought it was absolutely like you do it in such a subtle way without it like being telling the audience or the reader, I should say, exactly what these parallels are, but they're at the same time very clear and very hard hitting, like especially like you were saying with being told you can't know yourself, and his journey to like become a speaker to like show that he was a man, well not a speaker but you know. I won't spoil the story
Exactly.
too much, but um, it, that journey, and it's shown again like the journey as well and how followed with us, through overcoming like discrimination and overcoming the others people's views of yourself. I just reread both of them for this, and the ending of Hell Followed With Us is fresh in my mind again. The scene where he's standing there and going to go through this ceremony, and again, I won't spoil it, but having that moment of even in this time of monstrousness, you're still seen as not as who you are by those around you, is just really drove it home at that very end point. Very good stuff.
I'm very proud of the ending of Hell Followed With Us. It honestly, so much of the ending was like I think I actually rewrote the ending like right before we went to copy edits.
uh,
So this ending is very fresh, and I'm very proud of how it turned out.
yeah,
It did mean that I had to tack on like two or three extra content warnings, but this is nothing new for me.
Oh yes, the content warnings is as well. Like I know that that has been like a hot button thing in the book world recently. I think they're not only are they good for the reader, but the way you write them as well is like very, here's a taste of what's inside, and in a poetic way, but also as a warning for a reader. Like it's very good.
Yeah, I really like the kind of structure that I have with that. My third book, which is I turn in developmental edits Monday. Oh my God. I also have like a letter that's like, hey, um, I think the way that it's structured is if the United States gets better towards trans kids, I will rewrite this letter. However, I have not had a chance to write it, and I am sorry that that is the case. Um, Also, like we know this is going to be rough. Here's the content warnings. You know what you're getting into. But I'm also planning to have one in my adult book as well that comes out in 25. But that one's just short and sweet. It just gives a general overview, and it's like if you're going to have issues with any of these three major categories, I have the full list on my website. Go find it. But I think like the way that I have it phrased is this book contains extreme acts of contains like sex, violence, and abuse, sometimes alone, sometimes combined, sometimes all at once. This book is not autobiographical mostly. Um, so it's sort of a nudge to I have a full list somewhere else if any of those are going to be an issue for you. So you should probably go find it.
For sure, for sure. I think that's it's a very important in today's world, with both literature and media. I've had, you know, I can name like at least five different books off the top of my head where I've had folks come back and be like, I actually need to return this, and they couldn't. They might have had to, you know, not had to deal with that if they had had at least, you know, a little brief paragraph in the beginning.
Yeah.
It's very important. It's great as well for some of the younger readers that I've had pick up both of your books, as like a good way to like judge for both the kid and the parent to be like, okay, is this something we can have? Is this something that'd be appropriate? And most of the time they're all right with it, and sometimes it's like maybe a little later, and that's okay. And
Yeah, exactly.
it's a great and helpful tool. I think a lot of people don't think of that, especially because like we have YA that's like towing the line between, you know, YA and adult, and it's helpful for that period of your life.
Yeah, I'm a lot more in-depth and careful with my content warnings for kids specifically because I want them
Mhm.
to be able to open up the book, see exactly what they're getting into, and make the informed decision to move forward. If it's an adult, I am generally a bit more like vague with the content warnings as a sort of you know what I mean by this. You should probably go look it up if you think that there's going to be any issues that come up. But for my kids' work in particular, I tend to be a bit more granular.
Yeah. Speaking of your adult work, did you want to talk about it in this and promote it a little bit at all?
Oh yeah, absolutely. So I actually do have two books that are coming out soon. I have one coming out next year and one the year after that. The one that's coming out next year is my third YA through Peachtree Teen. We're working on the cover right now. It is amazing. And it's about an autistic trans boy in the summer of 2017. So right after the 2016 election, which plays a large part in the events of the book, whose family has been in a blood feud with the with the family of the local sheriff for 100 years since the West Virginia Coal Wars. And the blood feud hits the main character's generation, and he has to figure out what to do from there. And it turns out that his great great grandfather, who was executed in the mine wars, has come back as a ghost to try and finish this once and for all. The dog survives. The dog does survive. I'm writing a scene right now where it fakes out, and it's a little worrying, but the dog does make it.
Always
My
good to know.
Yeah, exactly. Lady makes it. My adult book, which comes out in 2025, is coming out through Saga Press. My editor also edited My Heart is a Chainsaw and The Only Good Indians, so I am in very good hands. I'm very happy with where I'm at.
Incredible.
Yeah, and it's called You Aren't Meant to Be Human. And this one is like gloves off, like disgust horror. I'm having a lot of fun with it. The main character is an autistic trans man who also lives in West Virginia. His whole thing is that he doesn't speak because he hates you. Like he can talk fine, he just hates you and doesn't want to. Um, who discovers that he is pregnant, and does not want to be. But his terrible boyfriend and the alien parasitic like predatory worms that they work for both won't let him like get rid of it. They're like, no, you have to have this. So it is 9 months of increasing paranoia and violence and just unhinged behavior, as he tries to deal with this hand that he has been dealt, and he is not handling it very well. Literally everything that he does, I'm like, dude, that's disgusting. Like, what is wrong with you? We know what's wrong with him. He's not handling this great. I certainly wouldn't. And that book is like rooted very deep in like my fear of pregnancy as a trans man. So I'm very excited for that one, specifically because I think it toes some lines. It nudges right up against some levels of comfort for me. So I think it's going to be fun. It's every time I explain the ending to someone, they're like, "What is wrong with you?" I'm like, "That's the exact reaction I'm looking for."
I think so exciting. I think, especially works that really challenge both trans folks and cis folks' ideas of, dysphoria, transness itself. All of those things are incredibly just important. I haven't had the pleasure of reading it yet, but I know that works like Detransition Baby, Tori Peters, like really push that envelope as well. Um, and some of Falcon Martin's works as well also do that. And I think it's so important to be like, there's everybody's multifaceted and everything has more than one side to it. And it's really cool to show that, and to show that there are like things that are unique to the experience that, and can also be shown with through body horror like that, and sort of show that to us it is that level of horrific. and
Hmm.
and also in light of like here in Ohio, thankfully we've just voted to pass abortion rights into our constitution, that just passed a couple days ago.
Yes.
So it's so important as well, to have that in our media, in our stories, of why it's important for the element of choice and for the ability to control your own body and your own medical decisions. Also comes up in Fear Bears Its Teeth as well.
Yep. We actually pitched You Weren't Meant to Be Human as like a post-Roe book, because the main character tries to get an abortion and can't.
Mm,
Um, Specifically because the people around him like deny him the opportunity to. They're like, no, absolutely not. Even and yeah, so it just gets really, there's a lot of discussion about it's kind of dystopian 30 years in the future sort of situation where it's recognizable as America, but things have gotten significantly worse, and talking about like anti-trans extremism, that sort of thing. So it's just it's hard to stomach all the way down, but I love the book. Oh my gosh, I can't wait.
we're excited too. That sounds amazing. Oh goodness. So let's see here. So we talked about. we were talking about the importance of own voices as well. When it comes to your inspirations, I know we spoke a little bit about I compared it to like the thing with the flood virus, and you talked about Dead Space and that sort of thing. I'm interested to hear especially with the spirit bears its teeth. Because I've been recently getting into more like horror media and such. Ghosts and like their perspective throughout history is fascinating to me. I just watched something recently that talked about how like the way we pictured ghosts owes in fact to early filmography and how it would how people would sometimes you'd get a double negative and it would show up in an incorrect way on film, be like, oh look, it's a picture of a ghost. But the horror I guess what I'm trying to say is like what was your inspiration for like the haunting aspect and like the ghosts and that sort of thing.
Yes, I'm a huge video game guy. Most of my inspiration for my work actually tends to come from video games. Like I mentioned for Hell Followed With Us, it was very Dead Space, it was very Far
Mm.
Cry 5, that sort of thing. For the Spirit Bears Its Teeth, the initial inspiration actually came from Dishonored. So I really liked the sort of pseudo-Victorian sort of situation that was going on there, and I really wanted to build around that. And also, it takes a lot from, have you played the game Rule of Rose?
I have not, no.
I cosplayed from it before I transitioned. I highly recommend it. And it's extremely difficult to get your hands on, so I do recommend just watching a playthrough. And it's about the relationships between girls, and how they can like little girls are terrifying. I remember because I was one of them. I was in that group. I was a terrifying little child.
Hang on,
So
sorry, give us just a second. We've got a bit of a connection issue. Just give me
oh no.
just a minute here, and we're back. Okay, all good.
Okay, good. Yeah, so a lot of like the connection between like little girls are terrifying. They are very scary, especially when they don't like each other. And I wanted to like play into it from like a trans mask perspective in this book. The ghosts were also, I didn't watch it, but someone said it reminded them a lot of Crimson Peak.
Interesting. I
Yeah, it
haven't
gave them
seen
a
it either.
yeah, it gave them like a lot of Crimson Peak vibes. And I didn't want to go with like the typical like like the bed sheet ghost, or just like a vaguely like like wavering, like sort of like washed out picture of a person. I specifically wanted the ghosts to be like reminiscent of something. So when you get to the end and you discover that lots of ghosts, when you finally get to see them, take the form of either the worst thing they did or the worst thing that was done to them, depending on who they are. I think the way that Silas describes it is whatever left the biggest mark on their soul. Um, so you have people who were executed during war times whose heads are kind of like wavery and not in one place, or people who were assaulted in life, are their bodies are like disjointed or have too many knuckles on their hands because they're not put together properly because they lost control of their own body. So I really wanted to like say something unique with like how each individual ghost is structured, because every person is so different. They would not die the same and they would not say the same after death.
Yeah, that's a view of ghosts that I've seen before. Usually it's in like a comedic context though, with like how they died. So seeing it in like a horror aspect was kind of like a cool flip on it. The scene that immediately comes to mind is the movie adaptation of Neil Gaiman's Stardust, where all of the ghosts are sitting in a row, and one's got like an axe in his head, and one's got like a spear through his chest, like that sort
Yeah,
of
it
thing.
just like a worse version of that.
Yeah, yeah, a very horrific version, which surprisingly you think you'd see more of, but but yeah, let's see here. We talked about, another thing I wanted to touch on was sort of like how you incorporate realism into your works and it makes it so believable. One of the good examples from The Spirit Bears Its Teeth is when the main character began to talk about James Barry, the real trans surgeon in history, and that sort of like put it into a setting of believability for me as a reader that really helps you like really get into the story and things like that. For Hell Followed With Us, references to like the world before, political or sociological. that still has an impact on their lives, like, and bigotry, of course, towards LGBT kids, even like when there's literally kids trying to survive in a building. um, it just really brings a level of believability that's so I very much appreciate it. But things like that are really cool. I really like that part of your work. Um, but let's see here. You'll have to forgive me. This is my first virtual event.
Oh no, you're good. Yeah, I've been doing these for a while. Yeah, it is no problem. I got you.
For sure, for sure. Yeah, it's like the structure of trying to keep it rolling when when you're not
Yeah.
in person, for sure. Um, but yeah, was there anything? I know we promoted some of your upcoming works. We talked about own voices. We talked about trans narration and the importance of trans narratives for young kids and for adults as well. Um, I guess something we could talk about. This is seeing as it's your first upcoming adult LGBT novel. Um, Talking about like how the impact of like LGBT media and in general, trans works and such. Having that like the adult playing field. Like, what do you expect to see out of that for your reception?
Yeah, one of the things that I think like really draws a line for me between like YA and adult is that my YA is very specifically it's written extremely carefully because I am fully aware that I am talking to a very fragile like population. Because young trans kids, they are a lot stronger than I certainly was at their age, but they have to deal with so much. And so I am very careful with the way that my books talk about hope and like moving forward and community and that sort of thing. Um, I every single one of my books, YA books, ends on a hopeful note. Um, in no way do I ever want to say that anything is slightly hopeless to this group of kids that are already hearing it from cis adults day in and day out. They do not need that. When it comes to my adult work, though, I can just say whatever I want. Like, I have no, like, the way that I see it is that, like, I have no moral responsibility to an adult who already knows, like, what's going on. Um, so I can just my job when I'm writing my adult books is just to scream. Like I don't need to make a point. I am just like taking all of my awful feelings and dumping them on the page and being like, so does anyone else feel like this? Yeah, I'm sorry if you do. Um, so much of my like adult work when it comes to like queer circles, it also I no longer there's a little bit of a expectation of respectability politics still in YA, I feel. That I try to break, certainly with Benji being like super gross and disgusting by the end of the book. I love that for him. Silas, for the most part, for really good reasons, but does some really gory stuff. The main character of my upcoming YA does the same. But with my adult work, these people are just awful. Like,
I'm excited to see it.
yeah, exactly. Just kind of like I understand like where they're coming from, but these are some really awful, nasty things that you are doing. Um, and I kind of no longer have to be as careful with what they're doing. Um, so it's definitely going to lend itself to a far messier and more complex sort of character, especially because like the things that I want to talk about in my adult work, I could not get away with in YA. And I can get away with a lot in YA. There is a 2,000 word chapter long C-section in this book. And there are some things in YA I can't get away with. That's what my adult work is for. Um, so I am really pushing it with my adult work. Um, it's just fun. I'm just having fun. This is what my editor knows what he's getting into. So there's this allowance for cynicism and like the nastier side of things that I'm really excited for. Um, and also like on top of that, um, I'm interested to see what like the non-trans reaction is going to be to that book. Um, because this is also one of the first books where I'm just like, I'm not trying to teach you anything, right? I'm not trying to teach anybody anything because especially with my YA, I could be talking to trans kids that are still learning about their identity and still trying to figure themselves out. So I am kind of hand holding a little bit. I am still kind of in the trans 101, 102 sort of area. Even for kids that are trans, they might not, have a full grasp on it yet. Because I'm writing for children. It's going to be a little hand holdy. With the adult books, it's just like, you can figure this out. You can handle it.
Understood. It also goes back to what I was saying about like I think the importance of showing like the good, the bad, the ugly in the media and writing. Like I was saying with Detransition Baby, I haven't personally read it, but I know from like listening to folks talking about it, both of like our customers as well, both cis and trans, coming back and saying, "Man, that was bad, but really good and important that I read it." like, and this angle of things showing all of that diversity and that it's not black and white, I think is incredibly. So I'm very excited to see it and see what you come up with, especially after how much of a fan I was of both of your YA works and like other horror adult trans novels as well, like Manhunt. So I'm very excited for it, and we are all as well too. But yeah, let's see. So I guess we can go and check on our comments here. I don't know if
Nice.
we've got any. Let's see. Fortunately, not as of right now. Not popping through our YouTube just yet, so we'll give it a little bit longer there. But we do have at least some viewers here, so that is great and welcome. At least I think so. I'm not sure if I'm looking at the right metrics here, but so I will say we will be uploading this for anyone watching live now, but we're going to be uploading it later to our YouTube channel so you can watch it as long as you want and get to see all of the details and hear more about Andrew Joseph White's work. But yeah, let's see here. I think what I had next here talked about both of those. Oh yeah. So I know I mentioned it briefly before, but it's not something that's like trans specific exactly. But just talking about I worded as the exploration of the self through horror, which is like it's a reoccurring theme. We see it all the time, especially even in like the dawn of horror, like Frankenstein, and you see like the creation of something and like the discussion it has about like the nature of humanity and the nature of the soul, and how Mary Shelley like would see our parts of herself in that work as well, and like the self narrative through horror is something that's absolutely fascinating to me. And this take on it through something that is, like I said before, books that I have never seen on a shelf before until only a couple of years ago. It's a new territory, it's a new way of storytelling that's both related to, as someone like myself, and I am biased, and for other, some of our customers as well, for books that, they've never had something that they can see themselves in. And I guess I'm just like broadly talking about like the work of self narration through a lens of fiction, and all the good and the bad that comes with that. Because a lot of people are like, oh, self-insertion, so to speak, in works is, frowned upon, but it sometimes. But in this case, I think it's an unique and incredible way to tell the story, and I think it's really, really well structured.
Well, thank you. I have like a running joke with myself that, writing is my special interest, so I am almost incapable of like processing most things without the lens of fiction. It's just how my brain works. I actually started writing Hell Followed With Us when I was, in like 2018, 2019. Yeah, 2018. Like a few months after I had figured out that I wasn't cis, like a month after I figured out I was a trans guy. And it was my way of processing like my relationship to my body and monstrousness and that sort of thing. So Benji was 100% just me like writing. He wasn't my first trans character, but he was the first trans character I wrote when I knew that I was. which sort of gave him like it gave me an excuse to like take the kid gloves off because like before I knew that I was trans when I was writing trans characters, I felt like so bad about it. I was like, oh, this isn't my story. What am I doing? Like I don't want to show this to anybody. I'm a little like worried about how this will come off. And then when I was as I was writing Hell Followed with Us, I was like, you know what? Yeah, that is me. I can say whatever I want. Like this is my lane. I can talk about it. So much of this book was me coming to terms with, how I felt about myself and how I saw myself. And also like my parents are great now. They're amazing these days. But the initial coming out was a little rough. There was a lot of bumps, there were a lot of issues going around. And this book was very heavily like my way of dealing with that anger because I had not allowed myself to express anger before. I didn't know how to do it. I didn't know what it felt like or what to do with it. On top of that, I have alexithymia, which is the fancy term for emotional blindness, which means I very rarely know what I'm feeling or what to do about it. And they all get kind of stirred up and, good luck. So rage was a very new emotion for me, and I'm like, I don't really know what to do with this. So as I was writing Hell Followed with Us, that was just like my way of expressing an emotion I hadn't known what to do with before. And then as I was writing Hell Followed with Us, I was writing the love interest Nick. And I was like, you know what? He has some, autistic traits. What I'm going to do is I'm going to do a bunch of research, not from doctors or parents, but, I'm going to follow autistic people on Twitter. I'm going to like watch their YouTube videos, read their blogs. And you know what? This seems like a really cool, like avenue for some cool representation. And then I did a bunch of research and I was like, well, this doesn't make sense. This is all normal, right? Like everybody feels like this. Oh.
Uh,
Oh, Andrew. Oh, buddy. So I was like, you know what? I'm just going to do something that is a little iffy. I'm just going to take all of that, kind of push it to the side, and then just write myself also into Nick, and then just kind of publish it and see what happens. And then I got some responses being like, like this is some of the most like legitimate autistic rep I've like ever read. I'm like, well, I saved $3,000 on a diagnosis. There we go. Um, And like around like right before the book came out, like I told my mom, it was just kind of like this character is like based on me. I'm pretty sure I'm autistic. And my mom went, you know what, that would make a lot of sense actually. We thought about getting you evaluated as a kid and it just never did because you seemed fine. I'm like, okay. It's like, okay, sure. And so when I started writing The Spirit Bears Its Teeth, I was like, that is a huge chunk of my life that I am just now finding out about. I want to like grab that by the horns and see what happens. So Silas is not my first autistic main character, but he is the first protagonist that I wrote that I published that I specifically wrote as autistic. It is really funny. I've gotten a few DMs being like, "Hey, is Benji autistic too? He kind of reads that way to me." I was like, "Well, I didn't intend for that, but I wrote him, so see how that turns out." So as I was writing The Spirit Bears Its Teeth, a lot of this was me trying to figure out how I see the world in the way that is different from other people's like experiences of the world, because I had spent my life under the impression that everyone else felt the same way I did about the world. I was just uniquely bad at handling it. I was just the weak one. Everyone else feels exactly the same way and they can handle it fine. So what is wrong with me? I thought it was like a lack of willpower or something. And I was like, no, actually, your brain doesn't work the same way. And I was like, that actually explains a lot. And now I have to figure out what the differences are because I had spent so long convincing myself that I was just like everyone else. Um, so writing Nick was like an exercise in seeing myself from the outside. And Silas from The Spirit Bears Its Teeth was, okay, buddy, now you actually have to do some introspection, which I'm not sure I appreciated, but it seemed to work out.
I can definitely see those parallels, and that, like I was saying, like the exploration of self through fiction, and like you were saying as well, like being able to process through fiction, both for writers and for readers, is an
Yes.
amazing journey, and it's a great way of like seeing yourself in works as well, as somebody who is also like that neurodivergent and trans as well. Like it's seeing those introspections and extrospections. It's probably not a word, but
I know what you
um,
mean. You're good.
yeah, outrospections, sure. But seeing that from both angles is absolutely fascinating, and I'm really glad you drew that line for me to see that. That's really interesting.
Yeah.
Um, okay, so we've got about 30 minutes from our runtime here. I mentioned to your publicist, if you'd like to, you can do a reading. It's completely up to you. I'm giving you like about a 15-minute block or so if you'd like to.
You
So,
know what? I think I have. Let me see if I can find it. Um, yes. Um, so this is about like this far into the book. And so this is The Spirit Bears Its Teeth, and this is, I think, actually the scene that convinced me to write my adult book about pregnancy horror. Because this book touches on some of the same bits of like reproductive horror, but like take like written clearly like for a YA audience, like written for kids. But this scene like really solidified that and like talked about a lot of my decision to be child free and not want to have to do any of that as a kid. Um, it's honestly really funny in this scene because it doesn't get talked about at the end of the book, but the way that I always talk about Silas and Daphne after the events of the book is that they have two kids. Um, so the horror that you see from Silas here at the idea of pregnancy is very largely tied to the way that he is seen by others. As soon as he is in a relationship where he is seen as a man, suddenly pregnancy is no longer as terrifying as it had once been. But this scene here really digs deep into that. I don't want to be seen as a woman, and like this is what they do. This is what they do to women in this situation. So fun. I'm going to try not to do the fancy English accent that I always do in my head when I'm reading from this. I highly recommend the audiobook. The narrator gets the posh London accent down perfectly. It's so good. All right. Again, I am taken to the dressing room, the locked room with the mirror, the odd bump under the rug, and stripped to my camise. Mrs. Forrester ties me up in an exquisite gown, rose and cream colored silks traced with gold. She smothers me in pearls as perfect as a wedding dress in a corset that accentuates every curve of my body. It's awful. Usually, clothing is not so bad. I can convince myself to ignore the textures, the stitching and seams, but yesterday has left me raw. Stand still, Mrs. Forrester mutters, turning me around to face the mirror. Stop fidgeting. With my pale hair and violet eyes, I am a collection of precious gems sewn up in a cadaver. Almost a bride, the rabbit says, then almost a mother, because what is the point of speaker marriage if not children and bloodlines? The rabbit digs up everything I know about pregnancy, the biological mechanisms, the diagrams, the notes. For the first time, it becomes a real threat, something that is possible, not just a bad dream. Until now, I almost thought I'd be able to avoid it if I really tried. I know enough about pregnancy to be terrified of it, which is the only sensible reaction to discovering how it works. Seeing a pregnant woman in person, or even illustrations of a fetus in the womb curled up on itself like a little sleeping lizard, makes me ill. I've studied how to remove a uterus from the body with a scalpel and a few clamps to close off the arteries, and I've dreamed of it so often I swear I know what the muscles feel like. The heat of the innards, the slick of blood between my fingers. But now I stand in front of this mirror as Mrs. Forrester pins up my hair, and I imagine it. Really, truly imagine it. I put a hand to my stomach as if skimming the stitchwork of the dress when I am in fact tracing the curve of a swollen belly that does not exist. What is it like to become sick as a fetus rearranges my organs to make room for its body? To feel that hot flush of nauseating panic when it moves for the first time, struggling against the confines of my skin? From a medical perspective, I would make it. I might even have it easy. Father always told us we come from sturdy stock. I have wide hips to allow for an infant skull, and mother said both George and I slipped out with barely half a day's labor. A million things can go wrong in childbirth, but my body means I would likely survive most of them. I wouldn't want to. I'd become like those women who go mad when faced with the power of their own bodies when it's harnessed to create something new against their will. But I could do it. Agnes, though, is so much smaller. She's not done growing. She's not ready. If her baby is any size at all, it will get stuck, and they'll have to split her open to get it out, or they'll crush the infant's head so it fits through the birth canal. And we can't forget, says Mrs. Forrester. She takes my hand and slips a silver speaker ring onto my little finger. My reflection is not my own. It is more a sculpture, an artist's creation than something that actually exists. It is something my parents would have commissioned to replace me. I really love that scene. It's one that like it's really short and it's right before Silas meets Daphne for the first time, so it kind of gets overshadowed, but I really love it. And honestly, it gives me a chance to like play around with like Silas's medical expertise. It's like, yeah, you absolutely, you love the medical sciences, so you definitely would have turned to that page in your textbook over and over again because you were terrified of it. Because that's exactly what I did when I played with my dad's medical textbooks. So
I honestly, I think it doesn't get overshadowed at all, in my opinion, the way it goes into the next scene, because that's her or his fear, I should say, is tied into becoming pregnant by who he assumes is a man that he's going to marry, and then when he realizes, it's that moment of relief of like,
yeah,
oh
it's
God,
like,
thank
oh,
God.
like like this is Daphne. Like I am engaged to a girl and like things like she understands me, she gets it. Um, yeah, honestly, in this book, I just took like any like excuse to like talk about like medical stuff. And I was like, yes, I have to.
It works so well, that thread that was woven all the way through it. Like it's very good. And also seeing just the growth in your writing from your first Wyatt to the second is just absolutely mind blowing to me. Like it was very cool to see as well.
That's something that like shocks me every time because like every night because I haven't read this book since I listened to the audiobook of it before publication. So every now and then I open it up and it was very clearly written by like a 19 or 20-year-old, like very clearly. Which isn't to say that it's not good, but that's the vibe. It's very that age. Um, and every time someone's like, I can only get one of your books, which one do I get? And I was like, well, the thing is, when you ask an author that, most of the time you're always going to get the most recent one, because that is the one where hopefully you're constantly improving from the last one. Hopefully, you're building a body of work where you're always more proud of, the next thing that you do because you're always growing, you're always learning. Especially because like I sold this one while I was still in my master's program for creative writing. And well, technically I sold this one too, but this was like I started writing it when I was an undergrad and it's kind of visible. And like this one, I was in grad school, and my third book will be written, after I've graduated and everything. And I just keep learning new stuff. So every time someone's like, "Which one do you recommend?" I'm always going to respond with the newest one because I'm always like, "That one's the best."
For sure. Yeah. Um, let's see here. I know we talked about both of your inspiration for your upcoming adult book being that pregnancy horror and that thread that started to get woven through in The Spirit Bears Its Teeth. I was trying to think. This doesn't really touch much on that too much in Hell Followed With Us, aside from just body horror in general. Yeah. Was there anything else before we get we're going to move to probably closing comments here in about 5-10. Was there any like particular subjects you wanted to talk about? Any parts of like your books, your upcoming books, anything at all, really?
Yeah, since I'm I'm in very deep with my edits for book three now. So my focus is like very quickly shifting to that one,
For
even though
sure.
I'm like, this has only been out for a few months, and I'm like, I'm already like 2.5 books away, y'all. Like I am so
Exactly.
far beyond this one. Um, Granted, this book was really difficult. This was really hard to write. Not even like emotionally, just like I kept breaking the ending. Like we had to do so much work on this. I almost threw it out like a dozen times. It was bad. I didn't like it until I got the arc. Like I honestly like hated the book until I got the advanced reader copy. Book three has been so much kinder to me. It has been so much easier on my heart, and I deeply appreciate it. Um, and so much of it is because I came up with the idea for book three, I think before I started writing Hell Followed With Us.
Mm,
Before I came up with the idea of it at all. I've been sitting on this book since like 2016. And I'm so glad that I finally get to write it. And a large part of that is because it's set in a fictionalized version of the county in West Virginia that my grandparents grew up in. And it's very heavily like intertwined with like West Virginia history and like Appalachian history. And I'm really excited to see a book where like Appalachia is treated seriously, and also like the leftist history and the leftist present of Appalachia are being taken very seriously. Because I know that, the book is very heavily centered in what would be considered Trump country,
mm,
um, which is a phrase I think that gets used in the book. The book is it says the names of like numerous politicians. It calls out like West Virginia's governor. I think the line is like, why did we vote like a billionaire coal operator into office? I thought we made a state identity on hating those guys. Like, what happened? Um, it talks a lot about, like small town resistance and that sort of thing, like small town, like local politics, and how that can get kind of dangerous when there's not a lot of oversight. And I'm very, very excited for that book, specifically because, my family's from West Virginia, and you don't see a lot of books that take place there. Every time I hear about a book that takes place in Appalachia, I'm like, I don't care if it's not West Virginia, just give it to me. Because the place that I grew up very specifically is not included in most Appalachian maps due to the fact that they removed themselves from the political conception of Appalachia due to the negative stereotype of it. The Shenandoah area like removed themselves from Appalachia because they didn't want to be like they didn't want the negative connotation. So every now and then I see a map that includes my little corner of Virginia on it on the map of like Appalachia. I'm like, you get it. You get it. I didn't grow up with my mama and papa keeping moonshine in the freezer for nothing. Do you understand? like, like my mama says warsh and my dad says crick, like instead of creek. I'm like, we do not talk like this for nothing. Come on. So I'm just really glad that I get to write my next two books take place in West Virginia. I get to talk about West Virginia. I love it so much. Um, so I'm really excited for that. I do think it's going to be really fun with copy edits, because copy edits are very, like getting the grammar rules correct and everything lines up. And my third book is written in dialect. It is specifically written the way that my mama talks and the way that I talk around her. Um, so there's going to be a lot of this is grammatically incorrect. I'm like, not in this context. Like that is how we speak. Leave it alone.
yeah. I think that that way of writing is absolutely fascinating, and also having more representation of like LGBT folks outside of like major cities and those sorts of areas is fascinating. I just read uh, God, the name, it's got a long, like, Panic at the Disco title. It's escaping me at the moment, but it's Hal Shreve's newest book. Um, I think it was How to Get
Yes.
Over the End of the World. That's what it
Hmm.
is. How to Get Over the End of the
Yeah.
which it's not wholly in a rural area, but there are like parts of it which are, and it really like spoke to me. I really enjoyed those parts of that book. But I think that kind of representation is incredibly important as well. So we are all like very looking forward to that third book as well.
Yeah.
Uh,
Small town and like rural queer rep is, oh, it's my favorite. I love it so much.
sure. All right. So we unfortunately did not get any YouTube comments. We'll probably get some rolling in after we post them. But we are so thankful that we had you here today. I had such a great time talking with you about all the different like ideas and things through your books. Hearing about like the upcoming ones too. I'm so excited about those. And our customers here are as well getting so excited about that. If you'd like to purchase either of the current YA novels that Andrew Joseph White has out. He'll follow with us in Spirit Bears Its Teeth for a limited time when you go to. We'll also be getting some exclusive pins in the mail as well. So we're looking forward to that. But thank you so much for coming in today. Oh, yeah, yeah, those are the
Yeah.
ones. I think our mail's a little slow, but we're getting them soon. We are very excited. So thank you so much for joining us today. I really enjoyed that.
Thank you for having me. I had a lot of fun.
Yeah, for sure. Hopefully, if we do any in the future, it'll be a little smoother than this one. Thanks for bearing with me. Appreciate it.
Yeah, that is no problem.
For sure. You have a great rest of your day.
Yeah, you